Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Music Den. I'm your host, Armando Venditti. Hoping you guys are having a great day and above all else, that trying to looking after yourselves and one another. Today, ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome you to a discussion on albums, specifically albums that are considered to be the worst in the history of music. Now, there is one specific album I want to talk about today, but I'll get to that in a sec. When you label an album the worst album in the history of music, that is quite a broad statement to make. And I was looking online and I found Rolling Stone had a list of 50 albums that they consider to be the worst in the history of music. And among those on that list were Metallica with Saint Anger and David Bowie with Never Let Me Down. Now, with regards to Saint Anger and Metallica, I've heard that before about it. I have the album, or I had the album, um, and I've heard the same about David Bowie. Now, with regards to Metallica, the album has been criticized for lack of bass in the mix, even though I know that Bob Rock does play bass on the album. And they've also been criticized for the sound of the drums. Now, in going for what the band wanted as a bare bones sound, the snare drum sound has been compared to, on St. Anger, has been compared to hitting the lid of a tin can or of a garbage can. And I would have to agree. Now, that album, as stripped down as they wanted it to be, possibly maybe they went too far the other way. And it has been noted that during their concerts over the past few years, or even maybe even since the release of the album, play very few songs from the Saint Anger era of the band. Now, with regards to David Bowie and Never Let Me Down, he had released two albums in the mid 80s, Tonight and Never Let Me Down. And they both received lukewarm responses from fans and from critics. David Bowie, coming off the mega selling Let's Dance, released Tonight in 1984 with the singles Blue Jean, and he then released 3 years later in 1987 Never Let Me Down, featuring the songs Time Will Crawl, Never Let Me Down, the title track. He received flack for those two albums, and he had conceded that he had relinquished control regarding the arrangements on the tracks for those two albums, and that it had annoyed him to the very core that he had relinquished control because he was always one that was in charge of his albums, from the conception of the songs to the arrangements to the production, everything. And he had decided to relinquish control for those two albums. And again, it really did annoy him to his very core about that. The album I'm going to be talking about that I've heard about for some time, at least 5 or 6 years, and I've read up on it every now and again from doing other episodes on this group. And I avoided listening to this album until a couple of days ago. And I think it was because of reading up on this album and that the band themselves and the lead singer had considered this album to be one of the worst in their catalog. In fact, the lead singer of this group has been quoted indirectly as saying that this album is one of the worst recorded and produced in the history of music. That band is Styx, and the album up for discussion today is The Serpent Is Rising. The Serpent Is Rising is Styx's third release. It was released on October the 1st, 1973, for the label Wooden Nickel Records. The album was produced by Styx and Barry Miraz, with a total playing time of 40 minutes and 7 seconds. There was one single release from the album, track one on side two, Winner Take All. And playing on the album, you have the original lineup of the band. As I go through my notes here, you have Dennis D. Young on vocals, keyboards, and accordion, James J.Y. Young on vocals and guitars, John Ciriluski on vocals, guitars, and keyboards, Chuck Panozzo on bass and backing vocals on one track, John Panozzo on drums, percussion, and backing vocals on one track, and also featured on the album is Bill Trout on saxophone on one track called 22 Years. Now, this album is listed as progressive rock and hard rock. It is noted that, or should be noted that this album was released a mere 3 months after the release of Styx 2, which was released in July of 1973. Styx 2 featured a minor hit, Lady, written by Dennis DeYoung for his wife Suzanne. Now, when somebody says that an album that they've released is considered by them to be the worst album in the history of music, or the worst produced and recorded, you basically sit up and you take notice of that and you think, is this even possible? So I sat down over the last couple of days and I listened to this album. There are uh, 10 tracks in total on this release. This album is a very interesting release. Starts off with the track Witch Wolf, which is a James Young composition at just under 4 minutes, at 3 minutes and 57 seconds. First of all, the guitar playing on this album is wonderful. The production does sound a bit muddy to me, a bit mangled in terms of the frequency of the drums. The track two is a piece called "The Grove of Eglantine," a Dennis Young composition at 5 minutes even. This is where they start to get in a more progressive vein. Uh, Young Man is next, another James Young composition, 4 minutes and 45 seconds. Um, yeah, it's, oh boy. Um, as Bad as This is next after Young Man, 3 minutes and 45 seconds. Wonderful acoustic guitar by John Ciriluski. At 2 minutes and 22 seconds, there's a hidden track called Plexiglass Toilet. And that track features John Ciriluski and the two Panazzo brothers on bass and drums, respectively. Uh, Plexiglass Toilet is a track of a calypso arrangement. Very interesting. Yeah, at this point, it does sound to me like the band really don't know where they're going with this album or with the music for this album. Side two starts with the single that was released for the album, Winner Take All. A Dennis DeYoung composition, co-write, and with James Young on lead vocals at 3 minutes and 10 seconds. Um, Good song, melodic. Oh boy. Up next is a track called 22 Years, a John Ciriluski composition featuring Dennis DeYoung and James Young on lead vocals. Just under 3 minutes and 40 seconds at 3 minutes and 39 seconds. Again, it's a piece that they don't know what they're doing with it. Um, I don't know what's going on here. Um, Track three is a piece called Jonas Salter, which is a Dennis DeYoung composition featuring James Young on lead vocals at 4 minutes and 41 seconds. This is where the band tried to go into more of a prog area. There have been comparisons from certain songs on this album to Yes and to King Crimson of the time. And I'll let you know my opinion of that. The Serpent Is Rising, the title track is next. A John Ciriluski composition with him on lead vocals at 4 minutes and 55 seconds. Yeah, okay. The album ends with two shorter tracks, and those tracks are Krakatoa, which is 1 minute and 36 seconds. It's a John Ciriluski composition, which is a spoken word, I guess you'd say interlude, with Cyrulewski providing, I guess you'd say, angry vocals. And this song is about a volcano of the same name that erupted in the 1800s. And the final track on side two is a track called Hallelujah Chorus from uh, George Frederick Handel's Messiah at 2 minutes and 14 seconds. This is an a cappella piece that features all members of the band on vocals as a chorus. Now, is this album, in fact, the worst album in the history of music or the worst album that Styx ever recorded? I would have to say yes. Um, I don't know what they were thinking. I don't know what was going through their heads. They were signed to Wooden Nickel Records. Apparently, Wooden Nickel Records was pressuring them to come up with the goods because they were a small label based in Chicago, and they were banking on Styx to be the band to break the label. Now, the album, as I said, follows up the release of Styx 2 in July of 73. And when I listened to Styx 2 back to back with The Serpent is Rising, you can tell that there is a decline in the songwriting, in the arranging. The production, again, is muddy. It is not that great. Um, the fact that they wanted to tack on a hidden track that is a calypso track called Plexiglass Toilet on the end of side one, yeah, it's not a good album at all. And I can see why the band denounced it. I can see why Dennis DeYoung has said, and it's been quoted indirectly, as saying that it is one of the worst recorded and produced in the history of music. It is simply not that good. Now, whether the band were feeling the pressure of coming up with another album so quickly after the release and promotion of Styx 2, that to me, that could be very well the reason that uh, the Serpent is Rising, or Serpent is lacking. And believe me, it is lacking. It is lacking in hooks. It is lacking in proper, clear, concise production in terms of the arrangement and in terms of the engineering of the album. It does sound muddied. Not as bad as Harder Than Hell from Kiss, but it is right up there with an album that is just, for lack of a better term, misguided. I mean, you have a band that were on the rise with the release of Styx 2 and The Single Lady, and then they come out with an album like The Serpent is Rising with a song like Plexiglass Toilet that just basically turns this album into a parody. I was reading up on that song Plexiglass Toilet, and it was noted that Weird Al Yankovic loved the song because Dr. Demento played it on his radio show. Case closed. There you go. I mean, it's it's not a good album in terms of its sound, in terms of the songs overall. I can understand again why the band would want to bury it and want to have nothing more to do with it. Maybe if the band had more time given to them by Wooden Nickel to develop the songs that they had, or maybe come up with some other ideas and not pressure them to churn out another album right away on the success of on the success of Styx 2 with Lady. Maybe they could have come up with something that would have been a hell of a lot better than The Serpent is Rising. Interesting enough, the track Lady slowly gained momentum for the band. The band went to a local radio station in Chicago and asked them to please promote the song Lady. And eventually, through the promotion of the song through local radio stations in Chicago, the band were approached by A&M Records, and they signed a major deal with A&M, and they would release Equinox with songs like Light Up and Lorelei. And then the band would go on from there. But as far as The Serpent is Rising, is it the worst album in the history of music? Damn near. It is. It is pretty bad. I it's not an album I would ever go back to. As much as I love Styx, as much as I love the harmonies between John Swiderski and James Young and Dennis Young, even on this album, because there's some good harmonies on here. The music is that bad, and it does not warrant going back to give it another listen. Whatever momentum they had building with Six Two, this album curtailed them for a good year in the development and growth of the band. So that's it for now. Please put your opinion of The Serpent is Rising down below, and please let me know what you think. All right, and please click like and subscribe, and hit the notification bell to keep yourselves on top of any new content I've got coming up. That's it for now. Have a great day. Look after one another and yourselves. Bye for now.